Welcome back. I'm Mats Nilsson Hane. I'm also within the business development team as Patrick within Interaction, but I cover the Nordic market. Enough about me. So we're thinking of having a short panel discussion, more a discussion than a debate, I think. But the purpose is, of course, to get you all involved. So after I will just get things going with the question to each of you. And even if I have plenty of notes here from your presentations, I really hope that you, the audience, will help me with this discussion. So I will actually start with you, Sofia. Personally, without being an expert in this field at all, but having read a little bit about it, having talked a little bit about it with clients, I think that one challenge in this area is that there's like no guy in the companies and organizations saying that, hey, this is on me. I will take responsibility for the GDPR. So what do you think is the kind of the challenge in that between the process and the systems and everything?
I think that's like a dilemma of the commons, to have it an issue that's quite either it's too technical, it's viewed like a pure IT security or IT architectural issue, or it's too legal, that is interpretation of laws. But I say from my client base, the one that has a creative approach that are very happy internally in financial services, they have been part of the product team. Actually, the balance between what do we see the customers want, how can we enforce our brand and credibility towards what's technically possible. So the best person, I would say, would be more of a holistic approach, like a product person, that are able to balance the technicalities and the market needs. Although it's especially training, there are training programs available internationally and in Sweden that are certified. So I think that's good. I could also say to the requirements, the expert group that implies and interprets the requirements in the GDPR, Article 29 group, they have done a guidance towards the qualifications of a DPO, and it's emphasized that yes, you have to be able to speak technical issues and to be able to also have a clear and thorough understanding of European and to some extent American privacy laws. And it's seen like a person who is your chief negotiator to the external authorities and individuals. And the best sort of teams to have is to have a multifaceted team, a SWAT team you could call it, or a TAR, sort of, with mixed competences with IT security, product, HR, legal. And then you have the question of, should the actual appointed DPO, can you have an internal appointed DPO? Since there are rules on conflict of interests, the person that is appointed as a DPO to the authorities, they will need to review, and if the reports are ignored, then the DPO has to report the company to the authority, which is it's quite hostile. Yes, it is. And that kind of, needless to say, if a DPO reports her company, that is taken quite serious, and you will get a lot of attention from the authority.
So you have an external DPO?
I think that depends. You can do with an internal DPO, but the cons of that is that DPO can't have impact on the business. It is only a compliance person. Because if you can change or impact how the business, the services provided, the purposes, or IT services, how you build and implement or purchase, then there's a conflict of interest. We have recently had a case in Germany that today has a legislation that's closer to the GDPR, and they have this conflict of interest rules. Then there was a junior IT manager that was appointed as a DPO. That was a conflict of interest. And so that's one thing. But if you have an internal team that's very pragmatic, they focus on the product, the services, then they are able to be more focused on business innovation, to lead the product, lead the services. If you have an external DPO that does the actual audits or risk reporting, then you are clear. Otherwise, you have to change your business development to have another person understanding the DPO's functions. So it comes down to the size of your organization, what you need to do. Obviously, I like to create new services and focus on data-driven innovation. But I think there are many approaches, just if you know the implications.
Yeah, I have my question for Daniel, but I need to follow up on that. So if in this environment you see today with tech companies being fairly asset and resource light, which is quite common, but still they're highly international, then maybe the external DPO could be the way to go, because you might not even have the internal resource to assign this to. So.
No, that's correct.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I have to follow up this. Sorry, I don't really see the, you gave the point, like, if it's just a junior IT manager, that's a conflict of interest. Surely anyone in the business has the interests of the business or the company at heart, so isn't it a contradiction in terms to have an internal DPO?
Yes, that is correct. However, it's the conflict of interest is not that you have your company's interest at heart. It's rather, have you the authority within your company to change decisions, because you can't review yourself. You are impartial. You're partial to yourself, your interests. So that is really that. Not that it could be an employee, but if you're going down that way to appoint an employee, it has to have limited authority. It has to have fixed terms, because you can't sack or change that person without having serious liabilities towards employment law, because it's seen as a disciplinary action. And the employment laws in Europe are very severe as it is, and this just adds on top of it. So you have to have very clear role and fixed terms. So that's, if you change a DPO after a certain time, then it's not personal or in any way a reflection of how that person did her or his job.
It sounds like it's some kind of external DPO and internal DPO, one for compliance and the other for implementation. Do something like that.
I think that's very good, because at the big fintech companies here in Stockholm, they feel the need, because they are the appointed DPOs with limited business impact. They are frustrated because they have so much knowledge and they understand the product, the market, the business, and they don't have a voice in those questions. And in such an organization, you really have to focus resources on the business development side to become best friend or become part of that team, just to listen. But you can't establish a chain of command. So it's either or a little bit of both. We like to work with both setups, obviously. But you have to team up the external DPO doing the audits and the internal team doing the business development. I think that's often most useful. And it's not only an IT security issue, because if you have client-facing products or services, you can mitigate the cost and administration of changing your offering to the customer. You don't have to rely always on the very expensive legal ground consent, as it has to be communicated. You can withdraw it at any time. There are other legal grounds, but then you have to repackage your offerings. So that's part of it.
So I'll hop over to Daniel. This is certainly not the first regulatory initiative or change we see in the market, but that applies to IT systems, applications, but also, of course, the business processes. But this time, do you see that there is a difference? And if there is one, what would you say is the key one?
Yeah, it is a massive difference because this hits almost everybody. Before, some specific law was one specific type of company, some type of industry. This is for everybody. And in what we hear and what we see is that people get this notion that, okay, if we just stop handling personal PII data, we're good. Well, you can't, because a name could be a PII data if it is identifiable with one person. A name and a company is, well, then it's PII data. So you can't really protect yourself from handling PII data with the GDPR as it is stipulated. So in that regard, yes, it hits almost everybody. It is one of the most drastic changes we've seen in a long time. And not only from a liability perspective, but also from how it actually affects businesses, startups. We don't know how the startup scene is going to look. Coming back to the insurance company, if I'm going to have a minimum of 2% of my revenue or 10 million euros, I mean, who's going to get that insurance for if it's not covered by our standard insurances? So it's the whole notion of this as a minor change. No, it's a big change, and we don't quite know yet how exactly it's going to hit not only in the market but the startups, which I'm quite interested in as well, to see how we grow businesses. Sweden is a country that we need to grow new businesses. All the big one is leaving, so we need to fill up with.
we need your business.
So we need to get a scene going, right, and this cannot be a deterrent from getting startups going. So it's going to be very interesting. So yes, it's a big change.
But I think that's the problem. If I go out now to my teams, I mean, we are building today. Today we will build 5 million things that are not compliant with this GDPR. If I go out, nobody in management, in any bank or any insurance company is even mentioning this. So
we got a problem then, yes.
Yeah, we have a problem. The legacy is going to kill us. I mean, it's going to grow us, but kill the others. So,
to be honest, I think that's the biggest problem with GDPR, that it's been taken too lightly, and it's been recognized too late. I mean, this, as you pointed out, this is too late. To be honest, it's 14 months away, and then we're there. So it's.
How much is this going to be a lawyer's war?
Quite honestly, I don't think it's going to be a lawyer's war as it is going to be an insurance company war. I think the insurance company is going to be the key for everything here in terms of how we're going to handle all the small companies to large companies. Because as it stands right now, everybody is equal to the law. They don't make any difference if you're a massive multi-billion company or if you're a two-person startup. You're equal to the law. So I think the insurance companies, rather than lawyers, you're going to get a job. Don't worry. But it's not going to be all lawyer-driven. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's going to be insurance companies going to be the key to this.
If I can just add to that, I would say that the GDPR is also driven, the motivation factor, that too long the EU has not been collecting enough taxes from US companies that are not established within the EU and does not have a tax base here. But the GDPR is, in fact, making it mandatory to establish a presence in the EU, which also means that they are going to be taxed here. So the GDPR will not be, it's not a PR thing, it's a tax issue, and tax is one of the most important things for our politicians, and hence that's why they are doing this. But also, the GDPR thus, since the American companies and nation, as Daniel pointed out, they are almost ready to meet GDPR standards. The sector regulations of fintech has been very ambitious so far and continue to be. So just imagine that GDPR will be harmonized throughout the EU, the same legislative work. the EU will be opening up, in fact, to American competitors. So it will be more easy for non-EU companies that are very good at PII. So this is a business question, truly. And you will see your market share decrease in favor of American companies that are leading the compliance, making more innovative services. And just to look at insurance business, in Sweden, I believe there are I think there are 2 offerings for a cyber insurance. And they are very limited, the coverage. Whereas in the US, well, there's like 50 different offerings. And Swedish companies that are knowledgeable of this, they are looking to insure themselves in US or UK perhaps. So this is really, where do you see your customers? Do you want to be active in Sweden, EU, or are you ceding to other competitors?
I noticed that so when you held your presentations that it's kind of a bit symbolic that GDP, the acronym, is gross domestic product, general data protection. So maybe there's a thought behind that. Yeah, but I also think that we've been discussing entrepreneurs, and you see and it's not, to me, it doesn't only apply to startups. It's like the way things are developed. You have these innovation teams within big enterprises that try to mimic the same approach, and you have these teams, this blend of commercial, academic, society, and data sits everywhere. Is this going to be a big problem? Because who's accountable in that rapid, innovative development universe? So maybe that's one for Patrick. It's a tricky one, but.
Sorry, as in who's accountable for?
Yeah, like in the typical the international development products we see today, how tech products and internet offerings are being both brought to the market, but also developed and even maintained.
But I think that's a little bit the paradox. If you think about what the EU is trying to achieve as well, is that harmonization across Europe. So it's meant to make things a lot easier. So you don't have to sort of, if you come to Germany, I mean, today Germany is driving a lot of the requirements of the standards, and everyone is aligning. You'd hope that in the future you could operate from Sweden and serve the German customer base. And likewise, I think there's this concept of 5th pillar, in the EU, so free circulation of data. And that's basically, so the aim is really to sort of fuel the economy with digital transformation and data. So I think if that's the overall aim, I can't see them making life difficult in terms of operating, on a pan-European basis. I think what you will have is friction, strategic frictions with certain countries, with the US, and it will come and go depending on the climate. Same thing with the UK and China as well. But I think for Europe it should be good, because I think it will reinforce the sort of pan-European side of things. Yeah. And I think also there's a pragmatic approach as well. I think it will not be so much up to the product guys to sort of adapt to the law. It's really up to the DPO and the compliance officers to understand how the analytical products are developed, and then coach the product, the product managers, and say, well, all of this that you're doing, 80% is fine. There's just this 20% you need to be careful. And by the way, if you do it, you need to do it a certain way. So it's almost, I don't think you can sort of all of a sudden centralize everything towards the compliance officer.
Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left, so please feel free. This always works so well in Sweden. But I think to conclude, if there's not any questions.
Yeah. We're an accounting firm, and what about sort of the GDPR and versus accounting and other legislation that have, there's contradicting legislation all over this, and what is the...
There is no contradiction, that's the truth. That if a subject asks for a request to receive a log and they want to object, or you have to erase the data, Then there are exceptions in GDPR towards national law, national mandatory law. So if you, for tax compliances or other compliance issues, we have quite a lot of sector-specific legislation in accounting and in health. Then you are able to keep that data, but the reasons are very limited. You can't keep the data because you have to store it, because you are the bookkeeping. If you have a you have to keep it for like 7-10 years. Then you only can keep that information in order to prove that you have done your accounting correctly. You cannot use that information to then contact people or do events and send in information. So when you store or retrieve information out of local law, legal grounds, then it's very limited what you can, who in the company that still can have access to that data, or what you can do with it. And if you are in a public sector, there will be more differences. The EU member states are allowed to do certain national applications. But for accounting, we have certain firms that do the digital accounting, that is as a service for other persons, for other companies. And as an example, if I own a accounting firm that supplies a system as a service, the only thing I can retrieve or hold on to information is to prove that I have had certain customers and they don't have a complaint. They have paid their dues or the balance is correct. I'm not myself as the supplier. Well, I don't do the bookkeeping for all my companies, so I can't retrieve or hold on to information, the bookkeeping, for 7-10 years. That doesn't apply to me. It applies to the actual customer. So for long as an accounting firm has customers, then you have to help them to fulfill their legal needs according to the law. But when they cease to be your customers, then you're able to retrieve data to protect your claims. If a customer wants to complain or money back or a liability issue. So that's one perspective.
Yeah. A quick comment on that, actually. I was preparing a initiative in our new marketing automation tool the other day, and I've sourced loads of market data over the years, and I really agree with Daniel. We've been spoiled. So when I did that and I reflected upon this, I realized that we had to change the entire process, all of it. And then that's just a very small little tool and a very specific initiative. And then I was thinking that, okay, if I was like a healthcare company or working with payments, and of course, the impact it's fairly significant. So with that said, I would like to thank you. Oh, question, of course.
I just want to ask, we also talk about the services that we use. Obviously, we have our clients and we provide them services and we keep GDPR in mind, but I think we talked about joint vulnerability earlier on, and then also talking about starting small. What are your thoughts about looking into our CRM suppliers, looking into the whole chain of services that we use?
Well, I can start off. Anytime you have a system which you don't own yourself, the biggest thing is what type of contract do you have with that supplier. It comes down to everything. Because if you are on a standard basic contract, which almost everybody is, because that's probably the cheapest one, so you start there, that could be an issue in terms of where the data is stored. It's also in terms of which the entity of the nationality of the entity is also very important, because the nationality of the entity will tell you which part of the world they have actually their home base, so to speak, and that if you have an American company there, it's American law by default, and they will not look at GDPR as a law because it's not an American law, it's an EU law. Coming back to the DPO situation where you have an international market, you might want to have one DPO for Europe and one that handles international communication as well, because it's now not only one law, it's several laws, right? So always look at your contracts. make sure where the entity of the company which you're purchasing the service is from, and start from there. And make sure that you have a clause in your contract is that negotiate that you actually have your data protected in Europe.
And I would say as well, look at potential tools which enable you to protect everything multi-cloud. So this is what I was referring, these cloud security gateways, which basically are, you can start using to, encrypt very specific fields for each database that you will use. So you sort of take control of how you want the data protected. So it's a little overhead, but you're in control.
Yeah, I personally think we will see much more data control and data encryption being done and controlled by entities and companies in the future.
Yeah, so a very quick question. I'm really intrigued by this idea of a chief privacy officer being external to the organization. But a scenario, I bring in an external chief privacy officer and they miss something. Think about buying a house. You get the second man who shows up and inspects your house and goes, yes, it's okay, and then it turns out it's all rotten, then they are responsible. But in this case, I bring in an external chief privacy officer, they completely miss something, I get caught. They've given me a clean bill of health. Who's liable? Me or them?
I would say it's go down to ordinary negligence, or how you actually, as a consultant, judge your liability. The scoping of the actual assignment will be very important, and also in the DPO section of the GDPR, it's stated that the appointed DPO, it must, it's an obligatorium, it must have the resources needed and the documentation and the support attention from the highest management, and they will actually report to management. So you can't purchase or limit the information you share with the DPO, even if it's internal or external, because ultimately it's the board's responsibility, it's the CEO's responsibility who manage the day-to-day operations and risk. So you don't solve, it's not as easy as to appoint an external DPO and have him or her being responsible, because advice is always provided in context based on facts. And the person, entity sitting on the facts, so to speak, is responsible for actually sharing that. But obviously, if it's professional misconduct, that has one aspect to it, even though I would say that is one issue in the mix of the responsibility of personal data.
Yeah, it's a bit like auditors. You have a degree of indemnification, but in this case you don't. So you can pay a lot of money to have an expert to come in to be your chief privacy officer, but ultimately you're not being indemnified in any way, shape or form.
I'm going to let that be the last question, since we have 5 minutes over time. I would like to thank our presenters, but most of all of you for coming here today. I hope it was valuable use of your time, and that you have something to get an initiative with now when you get back to your offices and companies. Thank you very much.